We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson, in the Declaration of Independence, 1776. But whom did Thomas Jefferson consider equal? This is what we're going to look at today, using a correspondence, a primary source, a letter between a man named Benjamin Banneker and Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson we've already discussed in class. We know that he is the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, whose eloquent words we have just heard. We know him to be the third president of the United States, who worked to ban the importation of slaves and accomplished it in 1807. However, we know him to be a man of contradictions and a slaveholder himself, who profited from slavery and had relationships with the enslaved persons on his plantation, Monticello. But a question that we're going to look at today, is he in favor of white superiority? Now we're going to do this using this correspondence from Benjamin Banneker. Now Banneker we have not yet discussed in class, but quickly, he's an astronomer, an inventor, a scientist, and he served as a surveying assistant in the development of Washington, D.C., the federal city, in the 1790s. It's also important to note that at this time he's a free African American and never had once lived in slavery. Some essential questions are as follows. This supporting question was pulled from the frameworks. To what extent was North America a land of opportunity, and for whom? The following questions are more specific to this lesson. Essential questions 2, 3, and 4. Did Jefferson mean that everyone was created equal when he wrote, "All men are created equal" in the Declaration of Independence? Did Jefferson view African Americans as equals? How did free African Americans speak out against the enslavement of other African Americans in the early years of the Republic? Our agenda for this video is as follows. I will provide a brief introduction to the lesson, in which I discuss the situation of this lesson within the unit, the content and literacy standards addressed by this lesson, a quick overview of the materials needed to interact with this video, some contextualization, which is a historical skill of the letter in which I discuss time, place, and circumstance, identify elements of the author's background through a biography, and some contradictions made by Jefferson to the Declaration of Independence prior to the writing of the letter, which will add to the understanding of the document. I will then read aloud the letter as you fill in your graphic organizer. Then we will use the text to answer the questions attached to the document. Our unit and content standards are taken directly from the 2018 History and Social Science frameworks. So far in our unit, we've already started to talk about the origins of slavery, its legal status in the colonies from the 18th century, and we mentioned the prevalence of slave ownership among Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, James Madison, and George Mason. Today we're going to continue our discussion of Thomas Jefferson while comparing and contrasting the living and working conditions of enslaved and free African Americans in the colonies in the 18th century. Now, it's important to note that African Americans during this time that were enslaved were generally not taught to read or write. This is important to note as Benjamin Banneker is very well educated, very well versed in literature, in science, and we're going to see how that's going to have an appeal to some of the early leaders that we've discussed so far. We're also going to touch upon indentured servitude by looking at a biography of Benjamin Banneker's family. Okay, we'll see that in just a bit. All right. And we're also going to note that here, free African Americans could have families, own property, hold jobs, and earn a living. In fact, Benjamin Banneker does so while building up and surveying the area that's going to become Washington, D.C. Our literacy standards that we're going to touch upon are from DESE and the Common Core State Standards. Today we're going to summarize a written text read aloud, or some information presented in diverse media and formats, including visually, quantitatively, or orally. I am going to read aloud the text. I am expecting you to summarize. And we're going to summarize the points the speaker makes and explain how each claim is supported by reasons and evidence. Some other literacy standards that we're going to hit upon is looking at the author's point of view or purpose, looking at their language or what they included or did not include. We're then going to determine the central ideas of information of a primary source and provide an accurate summary of the source distinct from prior knowledge or opinions. We are going to cite specific textual evidence to support our analysis of primary sources. We're going to look back in the text to answer questions at the end of this lesson. Some materials that you need to have are Banneker's words, Jefferson and slavery. We're taking a look at Banneker's words and how we're paraphrasing this. We're going to do this together, but I need to make sure that you have this with you. Okay? So in the left-hand column, you have the letter itself, one from Banneker, and then the correspondence from Jefferson to Banneker following it. And on the right-hand column, you have what we're going to put in our own words. And if you need to, you can use some of the words that I use in this video to answer the questions. Okay? Now, I know it's a lot, okay, but we're going to break this stuff down step by step. You're also going to need your questions that we'll use after the reading to answer. It's very important that you take a look through the questions first before we start reading. I want you to have an idea of the questions. So please pause this video and read through your questions. Okay, go through one by one. There's 8 questions total. I want you to read through them all, please. And I want you to also notice that they're asking you for paragraph 3, paragraph 5, paragraph 7. Okay, this means that we have to go into our letter itself and start identifying which paragraph is which. So hopefully you read all those questions. What I want you to do now is go ahead with me, and one by one we're just going to label the paragraphs. Paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, and so on and so forth. Now that you have identified your materials, you've labeled your paragraphs 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth, now it's time for contextualization. Again, this is a historical skill in which we look at the time, place, and circumstances to better understand a primary source or an event. Now, the primary source that we're looking at again is Benjamin Banneker's letter. This was written in 1791. Okay, so what's going on during this time or just prior to it? Well, we know the American Revolution, that's long since over. Okay, that ended in 1783. We had this new form of government set up during this time once we broke our ties with England called the Articles of Confederation. Now, that didn't go very well. Okay, we had this event called the Critical Period in which we had things like Shays' Rebellion. Okay, and states were infighting, didn't know how to handle things. Okay, so we had to develop a new form of government. And that new form of government, well, that started just prior to Benjamin Banneker's letter. That's the new U.S. Constitution. Okay, the U.S. Constitution, this is the same Constitution that we have today, okay, that is in effect still today, the oldest Constitution working, I believe, in the world, might be the second, actually. But it's not going to be essential that you know the U.S. Constitution for Banneker's letter. What you should understand are the rights that are being developed as part of amendments to this Constitution, okay? Thing like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, okay? The first 10 amendments, we also know them as the Bill of Rights. Now, what's going to be essential to Banneker's letter and understanding Banneker's letter are the phrases from the Declaration of Independence that this video started out with, all men are created equal, and a more obscure reference to something called Jefferson's Notes on Virginia that was written in 1784. Now, I want to give you a brief overview of what is in this Notes on Virginia written by Jefferson. Now, it's important that you remember that Jefferson was a slaveholder, okay? He had a plantation, and upon this plantation, he had about 600 slaves, okay, over his lifetime, right? And in watching some of those people, now keep in mind that these people have been taught not to read and write, okay? He came up with some ideas on their entire race, okay? And he makes those ideas known in his Notes on Virginia when he talks about slavery and race. He claims that African Americans are equal to whites. However, in reason, they are much inferior. Okay, so again, this goes towards the original question I had, which was, does Thomas Jefferson, does he believe in white superiority? Well, from here, you can see this. Yes, he does, okay? In reason, he says, right? Also, in imagination, he has some things to say about African Americans, that they are dull, tasteless, and anomalous. All right. So again, you need to make sure that you understand that Jefferson has these conceived notions that he's developed from working with African Americans that are enslaved on his plantation, right? And when African Americans have been exposed to art, they show no trace of art, painting, or sculpture, only narratives. Now, it's important that you understand that these are Jefferson's theories. These are Jefferson's ideas on race. It's important that you remember this because the letter that we're about to read is directly addressing some of these ideas that Jefferson has about race. But I'd like to look a little bit closer at Banneker and Banneker's family. Again, we're looking for context, time, place, circumstance. We want to know a little bit more about the author's point of view and the author's purpose in writing this letter. So we need to know a little bit more about the author themselves. Okay. So what I'd like to do is take a look at Banneker's family life. Okay. We're going to take a look at this comic book here that I have, which is going to discuss his grandmother, okay? And it's also going to bring up indentured servitude, which we've already discussed in class. Another facet in the development of Washington, D.C. was surveying the land. The story of one of the key surveyors started over a century before a sextant was aimed in the new city. England during the 17th century imposed the death penalty for over 300 types of crime. Innocent people were often convicted of crimes in order to ship them to the American colonies to work on the plantations. Around 1682, a young farmhand named Molly Welsh was milking a cow on an estate in Wessex County, England, when the bovine kicked over a bucket. Her boss accused her of stealing the milk. In those days, the penalty for stealing was hanging. Molly was convicted, but she called for the book. If a convict could read, the death sentence was lifted. Get the rope. Most literate convicts were sent to the colonies in America to work as indentured servants on plantations owned by British aristocrats. Molly gazed at the book, and Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee." So Molly was sent to the colony of Maryland. Convicted of theft and sentenced to hang in England, Molly Welsh saved herself by proving she could read. Consequently, she was sent to Maryland in 1683 with a shipload of 150 other convicts. Notices of the arrival of these ships were posted on ports along the Chesapeake Bay. This one appeared in the Maryland Gazette. Just imported from Bristol, the ship Rudolph, Captain John Weaver Price, 115 convicts, men, women, and lads. Among them are several tradesmen who are to be sold on board the said ship now in the Annapolis dock, this day tomorrow. Molly was sold at an auction in Annapolis to a tobacco farmer whose plantation was near present-day Baltimore. The 7-year stretch. Molly was required to work for 7 years as an indentured servant to pay for her voyage to America and her freedom. By 1690, Molly had earned her freedom. She rented an undeveloped tract of land along the Patapsco River and Cooper's Creek. All by herself, she started to churn it into a tobacco farm. Molly had no friends because hardly anyone lived nearby. It is possible that she sometimes received help from neighboring planters or their employees. Former indentured servant Molly Welsh soon became a successful tobacco farmer. By 1692, her plantation in Maryland was too much to handle by herself. Although she hated slavery, slaves were the only farmhands available. She agonized over making a decision for months. Finally, she purchased 2 slaves. One was hardworking, but the other... Me, I don't work hard in Africa. I am the son of chieftain. Call me Banneker. In 1696, Molly gave both slaves their freedom. Meanwhile, Banneker and Molly had fallen in love. Despite the social and legal obstacles at the time, they got married in 1699. Eventually, the Banneker family had 4 daughters. A law enacted in Maryland in 1684 stated that a white woman who married a Negro or bore his child forfeited her freedom and became a servant to the use of the minister of the poor of the same parish. Molly was either unaware of that law, or she figured her farm in the boondocks was too remote to attract the attention of the authorities. A tobacco planter in Maryland, Molly Welsh married her free slave Banneker in 1699. He was killed by a yellow fever epidemic in the early 1700s. Banneker and Molly had 4 daughters. Mary, the oldest, married an ex-slave named Robert in 1793. The couple used the surname Banneker, which was gradually changed to Banneker. They lived and worked on Molly's plantation. Their first child, Benjamin, was born on November 9, 1731. Remembering how the ability to read saved her life, Molly taught her grandson to read before he could walk. Ben Banneker would go on to have an important role in the development of Washington, D.C.
Benjamin Banneker can best be described as a mold breaker. He was born in 1731 in Ellicott's Mills, Maryland. As a child, he attended a Quaker school, one of the few institutes that offered integrated education, and he put what he learned into practice. At just 15, he developed an irrigation system for his family farm. When he was 21, a friend gave him a pocket watch, which he promptly took apart to figure out how it worked. But he was not simply satisfied by understanding the mechanism. He needed to make his own. So Banneker built his own clock from scratch. And it was so well engineered and the mechanism so precise that it struck on the hour, every hour, for the next 40 years. Banneker's clock gained him a reputation, catching the eye of a famous clockmaker, Joseph Ellicott. He helped Ellicott build a complicated clock, and in return, Ellicott loaned him scientific books and instruments for astronomical study. He taught himself everything there was to know about science and math, particularly astronomy. He began using what he learned to predict weather patterns and plan agricultural methods. He even predicted a solar eclipse in 1789, successfully contradicting many notable minds of the time. Seeing the practical applications of his work, Banneker began publishing Benjamin Banneker's Almanac in 1792, and it was a wild success. It contained information on weather patterns, farming practices, and was basically a how-to guide for agricultural life. The almanac also included political writings, such as a plan of a peace office for the United States, which caught the attention of Thomas Jefferson, and the two exchanged several letters. Banneker even implored Jefferson about the evils of slavery, advocating for abolition. When it came time for President Washington to appoint a commission to survey the site of the new capital, Washington, D.C., Jefferson made sure Banneker's name was on the short list. Banneker worked closely with French architect Pierre L'Enfant to plan the capital. But L'Enfant was notoriously difficult to work with and was known for his explosive temper. As a result, L'Enfant was dismissed from his post before planning could be completed. And in what could have been a devastating move, L'Enfant took a year's worth of the plans with him. Just when it seemed that the team would have to start from scratch, Banneker saved the day and the capital. In 2 days, Banneker recreated L'Enfant's designs entirely from memory. He redrew every street and stream and building, effectively saving the capital as we know it. Banneker died in 1806 at the ripe old age of 75. So next time you're in Washington, D.C., or the next time your dad refers you to the Farmer's Almanac for all the information you could ever need, remember that we owe that and so much more to Benjamin Banneker, the first African-American scientist.
Let's provide further context specific to the letter itself. This is from facinghistory.org, titled Created Equal: How Benjamin Banneker Challenged Jefferson on Race and Freedom. When the Bill of Rights was adopted in 1791, the liberties it provided were withheld from the hundreds of thousands of Africans living here in slavery. That same year, a free African American, Benjamin Banneker, challenged the ways blacks were seen and treated by whites in America in a public letter to Thomas Jefferson. In this letter, Banneker pointed to the contradictions between the principles laid out in the Declaration of Independence and Bill of Rights and the continued existence of slavery. In courteous but forceful words, Banneker called on one of Jefferson's own great Enlightenment principles, an ideal that intimately tied together political liberty and religious faith in a democracy, the idea that God creates all men equal. By 1791, Jefferson had already authored the Declaration of Independence, had been governor of Virginia, and was serving as the first United States Secretary of State. The lifelong contradictions between Jefferson's stated beliefs, politics, and practices on the issues of race and slavery are so complicated that entire books have been written about them. Early in Jefferson's political career, he made some attempts to gradually end slavery in the United States. In 1778, he drafted a law in Virginia that prohibited the future importation of enslaved Africans, and in 1784, he proposed a law that would ban slavery in the growing territories of the Northwest. He hoped that these limits would contribute to gradually phasing away the slavery economy. But despite Jefferson's misgivings about the slave trade, he continued to believe in the moral and social superiority of whites over blacks. In fact, he personally owned and sold upwards of 700 slaves. And evidence suggests that Jefferson had a decades-long relationship with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings, and fathered 6 of her children. Meanwhile, in his famous Notes on the States of Virginia, Jefferson condemned slavery itself, but reiterated the idea of blacks' physical and intellectual inferiority to whites. I advance it, therefore, as a suspicion only that blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstance, are inferior to the whites in the endowment of both body and mind. He went on to write disparagingly of the physical appearance of blacks and witheringly dismissed the intellectual and creative potential of the entire race. In light of such passages, referencing this here, Benjamin Banneker's decision to take up his pen and address Jefferson with a plea for a change of heart might have seemed like an extraordinary and potentially risky gesture. What I would like you to do at this point is to pull out your 2-column notes so that we can read the letter and put in our paraphrasing, our explanations, our summarization of what each paragraph is about. Let's begin. Sir, I am fully sensible of the greatness of that freedom which I take with you on the present occasion, a liberty which seemed to me scarcely allowable when I reflected on that distinguished and dignified station in which you stand, and the almost general prejudice which is so prevalent in the world against those of my complexion. So what is he saying here? I am fully sensible of the greatness of that freedom. Here, Benjamin Banneker acknowledges his own liberty as a free man. Remember, he's a free African-American man. But he describes how many African-Americans are without freedom. Okay, and he talks about how liberty is scarcely allowable. Scarcely allowable. All right. He also reminds Jefferson of his own freedom that has recently been achieved with the American Revolution and the War for Independence. Okay, that happened 1776. Now, again, it's 1791. All right. He also reminds Jefferson of his dignified station. Okay, remember that at this time, dignified station, what occupation does Jefferson hold? Well, remember that he is the Secretary of State during this time in the Washington administration. He also goes on to talk about the general prejudice, which is so prevalent, which is happening in a lot of locations, okay, which is widely found, okay, in the world against those of his complexion. Okay, remember, he's an African-American male, right? Many people are of African-American descent that have his complexion, that share his complexion. They have this general prejudice against them by many people in the world, okay, during this time. Widely accepted, widely practiced this general prejudice. Let's move on. I suppose it is a truth too well attested to need a proof here that we are a race of beings who have long labored under the abuse and censure of the world, that we have long been looked upon with an eye of contempt, and that we have long been considered rather as brutish than human, and scarcely capable of mental endowments. This last part is very important to listen to, okay? Because he's really conjuring up in Jefferson's mind Jefferson's own ideas that he had written down in 1784. Okay, now he cites Jefferson's own Notes on the State of Virginia, which portrays blacks as inferior and brutish, okay, and having a questionable mental capacity. Remember, those are Jefferson's words. He's throwing Jefferson's words back at him, okay, and he's reminding Jefferson of his past writings on race and his own personal prejudices and those held by many. Jefferson served to spread some of these prejudices with his writings in 1781, 1784, Notes on Virginia. All right, moving on. Sir, I hope I may safely admit, in consequence of that report which hath reached me, that you are a man far less inflexible in sentiments of this nature. So what he's saying here is he reminded Jefferson of his own sentiments, okay? Sentiments of this nature. He's reminding him how Jefferson had thought about enslaved African Americans, and he's hoping that he is flexible on these ideas, okay, that he can be swayed, that maybe what he had said in the past is not true. Okay, let's read on. That many others, that you are measurably friendly and well disposed towards us. Okay, he's saying you are well disposed towards us. Well, he basically says that Jefferson is a friend to the enslaved African Americans. All right. and that you are willing and ready to lend your aid and assistance to our relief. Okay, again, he's saying that not only are you a friend to African Americans, but you're willing to help us. Okay, from those many distresses which we are reduced. Okay, he's talking about slavery here. He's talking about the prejudices they face, and he's hoping that Jefferson will change his opinion, okay, and will continue to help as he has done in the past. Now, sir, if this is founded in truth, I apprehend you will embrace every opportunity to eradicate that train of absurd and false ideas and opinions which so generally prevails with respect to us. Again, he's talking about these prejudices, the prejudices that Jefferson himself has ascribed to, has said that he believes in those Virginia notes in 1784. And that your sentiments are concurrent with mine. Okay, so he's asking Jefferson to change his opinion and change it to an opinion that Banneker holds, which is, or which are, that one universal Father hath given being to all of us. Okay, again, that one Creator created everybody equal. All right, and that he hath not only made us all of one flesh, we're all human beings, but that he hath also, without partiality, afforded us the same sensations and endowed us all with the same faculties, and that however variable we may be in society or religion, however diversified in situation or color, we are all of the same family and stand in same relation to him. Okay, so essentially what he's saying here is we are all humans with the same level of abilities, however diversified. Okay, whatever color you are, you have the same afforded opportunities of mind and of body. Paragraph 4. And again, please pause this video if you need to stop and write some of this information down into your text boxes. Go. Sir, I freely and cheerfully acknowledge, okay? So I'm saying that I'm proud, I'm happy, and I'm proud to say that I am of the African race, and in that color which is natural to them of the deepest dye. Okay, so he is saying that his complexion is dark, all right, and he is proud of that. Okay, and it is under a sense of the most profound gratitude to the supreme ruler of the universe, so he's thankful to God, that I now confess to you that I am not under the state of tyrannical thraldom and inhuman captivity to which too many of my brethren are doomed. So he's saying that he is a free man, but many others like him are not. His brethren are doomed to inhuman captivity and tyrannical thraldom. Okay. But that I have abundantly tasted of the fruition of those blessings. He's talking about liberty. He has freedom and liberty, which proceed from that free and unequal liberty which you are favored. Okay, so he's saying to Jefferson again, you also have the same liberty and freedom that he does, okay, that I do, if I'm Banneker, and which I hope you will willingly allow you have mercifully received from the immediate hand of that being, from whom proceedeth every good and perfect gift. Okay, he's talking about those inalienable rights that were given by the Creator, is what he's saying here, that freedom, okay, that was given to both Jefferson and he, Banneker. All right, so in summary, he's saying, I am free, but there are many like me who are enslaved. I have felt the freedom of liberty, and I have accomplished a great deal with it, as have you, Mr. Jefferson. It is by the grace of God that we are both free, and it's our duty as free men to liberate those held in captivity. My people need their God-given natural rights restored, is what he's saying. Let's move on to paragraph number 5 here. Video 2 continued from paragraph 5. Sir, suffer me to recall to your mind that time in which the arms and tyranny of the British Crown were exerted, with every powerful effort in order to reduce you to a state of servitude. So what he's asking, what Benjamin Banneker is asking from Thomas Jefferson, is to remember, okay? Recall to your mind, to remember when the British were the ones oppressing the colonists, okay? And they were doing that with arms, okay, weaponry. And they were doing that with a tyrannical king, all right? To a point where they reduced the colonists to a state of servitude, to a state of slavery, okay? Look back, I entreat you. So again, he's asking Jefferson to remember, okay, to look back, reflect upon, okay, the variety of dangers to which you were exposed, okay. Some people don't know this, but Jefferson himself, he had to flee his home, Monticello, because he was scared of the British, who then occupied Monticello for some time. Benjamin Banneker wants Jefferson to remember that and how that may have felt, okay, to reflect on that time in which every human aid appeared unavailable, okay. So he's saying, remember when humans next to you were not helping you, okay, that were not providing you aid, that were not providing you assistance in becoming free, and in which even hope and fortitude wore the aspect of inability to the conflict. So things looked hopeless, okay? And you cannot be led to a serious and grateful sense of your miraculous and providential preservation, okay? It didn't seem like things were going to happen for you, but they did, all right? And it was miraculous, and it was God-given, all right? This freedom, this liberty. You cannot but acknowledge that the present freedom and tranquility, the one that Jefferson achieved or obtained during the Revolution, that's what he's talking about, this freedom and liberty, which you enjoy, you have mercifully received. Okay, so he's saying that God has granted you this gift of freedom, and that it is the peculiar blessing of heaven. Okay, so again, what's this about? Essentially, he's referring to the Revolution. Mr. Jefferson, you were once a slave to the tyranny of the British Crown, and you once took great measures to free yourself and regain your liberty when all hope seemed lost. All right, and now you have it. Now you have it. What are you going to do with it, Mr. Jefferson? Essentially is what Banneker's saying here. Let's move on to paragraph number 6. This, sir, was a time when you clearly saw into the injustice of a state of slavery. Okay, so back when the Revolution was happening, when this stuff was occurring to you, Jefferson, okay, when those liberties were being denied to you, when freedom was being denied to you, that's when you saw the injustice, when it was happening to you. I continue. And in which you had just apprehensions of the horrors of its condition. Okay, again, you saw that it was poor and it was bad. You saw the injustices. It was now that your abhorrence thereof was so excited that you publicly held forth this true and invaluable doctrine. All right, what's he's going to say here? So he's saying that you publicly stated this true and invaluable doctrine. All right, what's he going to be talking about here? Which is worthy to be recorded and remembered in all succeeding ages. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Again, what is he citing here? Yes, he's citing the Declaration of Independence. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, so yes, he's bringing in Jefferson's words, but he's bringing in Jefferson's words to show how much of a hypocrite Jefferson is. Okay, so he's saying, Mr. Jefferson, these are the same liberties you referred to in the Declaration of Independence, that as a nation we fought for, and that you, Mr. Jefferson, claim were denied, and now that your oppressor is gone, you enjoy. Paragraph 7. Here was a time in which your tender feelings for yourselves had engaged you thus to declare. You were then impressed with proper ideas of the great violation of liberty. So again, Banneker is saying, again, this is a time when you felt that it was okay to declare independence, to tell the world about these ideas, these violations of liberty. Okay, again, he's referring to the Declaration of Independence. And the free possession of those blessings to which you were entitled by nature. So he's saying that you wrote that in the Declaration of Independence that the Creator had given you unalienable rights, that nobody can take these rights away from you, that you are entitled to these rights. But sir, how pitiable is it to you to reflect that although you were so fully convinced of the benevolence of the Father of mankind, and of his equal and impartial distribution of these rights and privileges, which he hath conferred upon them, that you should at the same time counteract his mercies. Ooh, that's a big one here. That you should at the same time counteract his mercies. So he's saying that you are given these rights by God, that you claimed were given by God, right? That you were fully convinced of. That the Father of mankind has bestowed upon you, okay? Those unalienable rights. But at the same time, You counteract his mercies. How is he counteracting his mercy? He's enslaving others, okay? Him personally. This is a personal attack, it seems. In detaining by fraud and violence so numerous a part of my brethren. Okay, who is his brethren? He's talking about African Americans detaining by fraud. Okay, so essentially enslaving by fraud and violence his brethren, African Americans. Under groaning captivity and cruel oppression, that you should at the same time be found guilty of the most criminal act. Okay, again, he's calling him a hypocrite. Which you professedly detested in others, with respect to yourselves. Again, Mr. Jefferson, these are the same liberties you referred to in the Declaration of Independence. There's a nation we fought for, that you, Mr. Jefferson, claim were denied, and now that your oppressor is gone, they are freedoms you enjoy. But furthermore, when it was you that was denied your freedom, then it was something to fight against, to speak out against, to call an injustice. But, and this is the big one here, you should at the same time counteract his mercies. Okay, so now that your oppressor is gone, you have become the oppressor. All right, let's see how Banneker ends this letter here. I suppose that your knowledge of the situation of my brethren is too extensive to need a recital here. So again, he's saying that, Mr. Jefferson, I know you understand slavery, and I know you understand the horrors of slavery and the situation of African Americans in this country. Neither shall I presume to prescribe methods by which they may be relieved. Now, this is interesting because Banneker says here that he doesn't really have a plan or a way of saying, okay, let's free all the slaves. He doesn't really know how to do that, he's saying. He's not going to propose to prescribe methods. He's not going to tell Jefferson how to do away with slavery. He continues, otherwise than by recommending to you and all others to wean yourselves from those narrow prejudices which you have imbibed with respect to them. Okay, so what is he saying here again? He's referencing those prejudices that were found in those notes of Virginia in 1784, those other prejudices that the world has, that he has referenced that the world has towards African Americans. Okay, and he's suggesting he's not going to prescribe methods, but he is going to prescribe a recommendation that leaders wean themselves off of those narrow prejudices, okay, that they have had up until this point. Thus shall your hearts be enlarged with kindness and benevolence towards them. So if you get rid of prejudices, your hearts will operate with kindness and benevolence, okay, towards African Americans. And now, sir, I shall conclude and subscribe myself with the most profound respect. Your most obedient, humble servant, and he signs off, Benjamin Banneker. Now again, Benjamin Banneker doesn't have a plan for emancipation, for abolishing slavery, or how to rid people's minds of prejudices, but suggests that people like Jefferson would have a heart to move towards emancipation if he, and people like him, could rid their minds of false prejudices. Alright, so let's take a look at the reply from Jefferson to Banneker's letter. Okay, now this is coming on the 30th of August. Now, his letter was written on the 19th instant, which is the 19th day of August. So when you hear a letter of the 19th instant, it means it's the 19th day of the month. Okay? Sir, I thank you sincerely for your letter of the 19th instant, and for the almanac it contained. Now, if you remember from our time when we were trying to contextualize this document, we found that Benjamin Banneker was an author of almanacs. Okay, so he must have sent his almanac along with this letter. Okay, and that also shows that, Benjamin Banneker is a man of intellect. Okay, strongly going against what Jefferson had written in 1781, 1784 in those notes of Virginia. I continue. Nobody wishes more than I do, Jefferson says, to see such proofs as you exhibit. So what Jefferson is saying here is that Benjamin Banneker has shown that he has the intellect, okay? Despite that he's African American in the eyes of Jefferson, okay? Remember, Jefferson is saying that maybe that's not possible, that you can have intellect and be African American at the same time. Remember, he's operating from a point of white superiority. Okay, I continue here. That nature has given to our black brethren talents equal to those of the other colors of men. So, nobody wishes more than I do to see such proof. So, he wants proof that African Americans are equal in talent to white people. Okay, so this is what he's saying, Jefferson is saying so far. And that the appearance of the want of them is owing merely to their degraded condition of their existence. So he's saying that African Americans, maybe he was mistaken prior to his assumptions in their intellect, and what he's saying is that maybe it is a circumstance of their condition, okay, the condition of slavery. I can add with truth that nobody wishes more ardently to see a good system commenced for raising the condition both of their body and mind to what it ought to be as far as imbecility of their present existence, and other circumstances which cannot be neglected will admit. So Jefferson is saying that he wants a system where African Americans are educated, essentially, okay? But he kind of underhandedly says that all African Americans are imbeciles in their present existence. You can see that here. Jefferson continues, I have taken the liberty of sending your almanac to Monsieur de Condorcet, Secretary of the Academy of Sciences in Paris, and member of the Philanthropic Society, because I have considered it as a document to which your whole color had a right for their justification. All right. So he's saying that perhaps Benjamin Banneker is justified against the doubts which have been entertained of them. Okay, so it does seem that Jefferson is not of a fixed opinion, that he is open to maybe the belief that there is equality amongst, or could be achieved amongst, African Americans and whites. He signs off, I am with great esteem, sir, your most obedient, humble servant, Thomas Jefferson. So before we go and answer the questions that are attached to the letter, what I would like you to do is go ahead, if you haven't already, haven't followed along with the video, go ahead and make sure that you have identified each paragraph, what's going on in the paragraphs, what the letter is about, okay? And then we'll get into the questions. Right, now after we've read the letters, we're going to take a look at the questions, okay? We're going to answer the questions below. We're going to be sure to support our answer where required. So that means we have to cite textual evidence. Remember, that's one of the things we're working on as far as the literacy skills goes, okay? So what does Banneker mean by the prejudice which is so prevalent in the world against those of my complexion in the first paragraph? Banneker is referring to African Americans in the horrific way they are treated at that time. You can see that after you go back to the first paragraph. Let's take a look at number 2. How does Banneker characterize Jefferson in paragraph 3? All right, we have to go back to paragraph 3 to find out. All right, so you've labeled paragraphs 1, 2, and 3. Okay. If you remember, when we went back, when we were talking about this paragraph, we were talking about how Jefferson is more flexible than others on these ideas of slavery and race, and that he is more friendly and willing to lend assistance and aid to African Americans' relief, a friend to African Americans. Number 3 is asking, in what way does Banneker compare the American colonies to slavery in paragraph 5? All right, paragraph 5, as you recall, is this paragraph here, okay? And in reading that, we discover that Banneker states the colonies were once held at the mercy of England without the rights they were owed, okay? And he says that in that way, slaves are in a similar position. So let's take a look at number 4. What argument does Banneker make to Jefferson? Okay. Number 4, we know that he states that slavery is a horrible and cruel fate for his brethren, and if Jefferson truly believes that God granted all men equal abilities and intelligence, then it must be that men treat others with equality as well. In paragraph 7, question 5 is asking us to find out what he is accusing Jefferson of. Okay, so what is Banneker accusing Jefferson of? Well, we use the word hypocrisy a lot, okay, when we were talking about Jefferson as we were reading Banneker's letter. Okay, so let's see what we have here. He hints that Jefferson is a hypocrite for advocating the freedoms and rights for all, while at the same time owning slaves. Okay, again, detaining by fraud and violence so numerous a part of my brethren. Remember that Jefferson owned 600 slaves, and his question 6 asks us, what does he ask of Jefferson? What does Banneker ask of Jefferson? Well, he simply asks that Jefferson and others wean themselves from those narrow prejudices and become more open-minded and accepting. Okay, Banneker believes that if they do this, their hearts will be enlarged with kindness and benevolence towards African Americans. How would you summarize Jefferson's reply? Well, if we look at Jefferson's reply, you'll notice that, Jefferson seems to agree with Banneker's statements. However, it seems that he wants more evidence or more proof. Okay, so Jefferson seems to agree with Banneker's statements on the equality of whites and blacks. He seems like he wants more evidence to show the world to prove that men are equal regardless of race. His response is short, though he does not go as far as to offer any aid or state that he will help Banneker. Okay, that's interesting. What I would like you to do is answer 8 on your own. So come into class with number 8 fully completed. Okay, we've gone over this at length. I think you'll do just fine. If you have any trouble, please email me. Thank you. Also, I'd like to remind you to come into class with your 2-column notes fully and completely filled in. If you have any trouble, please email me. I hope you had an enjoyable time learning about Jefferson and Banneker and how Banneker challenged Jefferson on the ideas of race and slavery.